Welcome to The Exchange. I'm Rob Cox of Reuters Breaking Views. My guest today is Christina Alger, who's just written a fictional crisis book called The Darlings. I'm also joined by Jeff Goldfarb, who's an assistant editor at Breaking Views with me. Christina, sounds a lot like families we've heard about in the financial crisis. I mean, it sort of sounds a bit like a composite of all the things we've seen during the crisis, from the Madoff scandal in particular to all sorts of other ones. I just thought, why don't you tell us a bit about what inspired you to write this tale of the Darling family?
I was practicing as a lawyer in the fall of 2008, and I just thought it was such an interesting time in New York, especially to be working kind of in the financial sector. And so I sort of took a few stories from the headlines that I thought were interesting and created the Darling family, which, as you said, is sort of drawn from reality. But
2008, my God, there were a lot of headlines.
I know.
But what were the ones that I mean, clearly the Madoff scandal, the feeder funds that were, what else?
The Madoff scandal obviously was probably the best known Ponzi, but there were a lot of Ponzi schemes happening at that time, which I thought was sort of interesting to watch. And just generally, I think in New York, there were firms kind of collapsing on a daily basis. The book takes place over 5 days, and I thought it was sort of fun to watch something collapse in that sort of timetable.
Where did you want to take this story? Because obviously, because the story will feel real and familiar. Where did you kind of want to take it that people couldn't get from reading the newspaper or the magazines?
Yeah, I mean, I thought one of the things that was interesting to me during that time was there was a lot of nonfiction coming out reasonably quickly, and a lot of it was really good. And I didn't see a lot of fiction, and so there wasn't as much about the kind of emotional side of what was going on, getting into kind of the hearts and the minds of the people that were involved in those kinds of things.
I mean, that is one of the things. I mean, when you think of there was a lot of crisis nonfiction.
Yeah.
So tons of stories that came out about what actually happened here. There isn't. What you've done is it's a bit like what Tom Wolfe did with Bonfire of the Vanities, which was try to explain that sort of 80s greed, experience through the family, the tale of a family.
Yeah, I always see it as a family drama that's kind of set against a financial backdrop. So I find it interesting when people say it's like a financial thriller, but that's how I like to see it.
Well, in terms of, I mean, one of the big themes that I think that comes out is sort of a denial. And I wonder, where you saw, either you drew on that as experience having worked on Wall Street or in law, or what you were observing. How did that, I mean, it comes out pretty loud and clear as a big theme.
Well, I think, just living in New York during that period, there's a scene, the opening scene takes place at this benefit party, and there are all these people there that sort of, they're carrying on as though nothing has really changed, even though it's changed demonstrably for most of the people there. And I just remember being at a party sort of similar to that and thinking, this is fascinating to watch. It was sort of like social anthropology.
Do you think it's more a story about New York society or say the society of the financial elite rather than the actual financial industry? Is that sort of a fair?
It is for me, yeah. Definitely. So.
And how much of this was shaped by your background? I mean, you worked at Goldman Sachs at some point in your career. You were a corporate lawyer, or a Wall Street lawyer. I can't believe you're not doing that. Instead, you're writing fiction.
I know. Well,
I guess that tells us something about what you thought of those working in that capacity. But how was that helpful?
It was, it was really helpful. I grew up in New York too. My family ran a family business, not unlike the one in the book. So I kind of drew from that experience, and obviously having a facility with what was going on was useful. In some ways, it kind of hindered me because it's a little hard to write. You start getting into legal jargon really quickly, so I tried to temper that.
You became a brief.
Yeah, exactly.
But did you draw on any experience? I mean, Alger is your family fund management company. How informative was that to your writing this book?
I think it helped shape the daughters' sort of personalities and the way the family interacts. So, I mean, the Darlings are interesting. Everyone, Carter Darling employs his sons-in-law, and they all kind of work together, and it's a real family enterprise. And I don't know, our family was a lot like that. We just talked about business over breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So,
what have you heard back from either former colleagues or just people in finance who have now probably, some of them certainly have had a chance to read it? What's the feedback that you're getting from them?
I mean, it's been positive. Everyone seems to enjoy it, so hopefully I haven't offended anyone.
I mean, you do show a degree of empathy, which I think is probably lacking, again, going back to the nonfiction comparison. There's, it's about greed, and, there's Schadenfreude, and you kind of, you're hard on some of the characters, but there's definitely a degree of empathy there, and I wonder if people are seeing that, feeling like, oh, wow, you've kind of realized a little bit deeper about what we're about.
I mean, I was doing my best. I think it's a lot more interesting, to write sort of these flawed but slightly sympathetic characters, and So I don't know, hopefully people see that in them or don't give up on them purely because they're kind of Wall Street villains.
Has anyone come up and said, hey, wait a minute, that's me. That looks like me in the book. What do you...
It's funny, this only happened once, and it was someone that it just didn't occur to me that they would think that, or it wasn't based on them at all, so it was kind of amusing. But
there are people that could have come up and said,
absolutely.
Wait a second.
I have not heard from them.
Now, what's the next gig for you? Are you going to go back to becoming a corporate lawyer?
Not as
Or are you
now.
going to write another book?
I'm in the process of writing another book, so, barring that failing miserably, I probably won't go back to law.
Can you give us a sort of a tease on what the next book's going to be about?
Yeah, I actually, the character of Bill Robertson, who's the Attorney General in this book, he's sort of a small character, but I thought he was a really interesting one. So it's a book that sort of revolves around him. It's not really a sequel, but it's kind of a follow-up.
There's lots of stories of attorney generals in New
I
York
know.
you can write about that.
So you might get calls from one Mr. Spitzer at some point. But
well, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks.
That was Christina Alger, who's just written The Darlings, which is a hot new fiction book about the financial crisis, and Jeff Goldfarb, my colleague from Breaking Views. I'm Rob Cox, and we'll be back with another exchange soon.